the badge, and the butterflies. The roar of the engine vibrated through Riley's bones as she wrestled the steering wheel. The suspect, a skinny kid barely old enough to shave, weaved through the pre-dawn traffic like a desperate rat. Each swerve sent a jolt of adrenaline through Riley, a familiar cocktail of fear and exhilaration. Her badge, cold against her chest, felt like a promise, a weight of responsibility that both grounded and spurred her on. Dispatch, suspect is heading east on Elm, approaching the intersection with Vine, driving a stolen blue sedan, license plate Tango Sierra 947. Riley's voice was steady, a practiced calm, masking the frantic calculations in her head. The sedan blew through a red light, tires screeching a protest. Riley braced herself, her gut clenching as she followed, narrowly avoiding a delivery truck. This was it. She had to end this now. Suspect is disregarding traffic signals, requesting permission to engage pit maneuver. A crackle of static, then the dispatcher's voice, laced with tension. Permission granted, Officer Callahan. Proceed with caution. Riley took a deep breath, her hands tightening on the wheel. She waited for the perfect moment, the sweet spot where she could execute the maneuver without causing undue harm. The sedan straightened out momentarily, and Riley seized the opportunity. A sharp turn, a calculated bump, and the sedan spun out, slamming into a lamppost with a sickening crunch. Riley braked hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. She drew her weapon, her movements precise and deliberate as she approached the wrecked vehicle. The kid was dazed but alive. He offered no resistance as Riley cuffed him. As she read him his rights, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, a stark contrast to the grim reality of the scene. Back at the precinct, the adrenaline slowly subsided, leaving Riley with a familiar hollowness. Paperwork. Endless paperwork. Callahan, Thompson. O'Malley wants to see you both. Riley looked up, surprised. Mark Thompson. Detective Thompson. The man was a walking, talking complication. Married, handsome, and radiating an unsettling charm that made her question her own damn sanity. She found him leaning against the water cooler, a lazy smile playing on his lips. Morning, Callahan. Heard you had a little excitement out there. Just another day at the office, Thompson. She grabbed a paper cup and filled it with water, avoiding his gaze. O'Malley's office was small and cluttered, overflowing with files and half-eaten donuts. All right, Callahan, Thompson. I got a simple one for you. B&E at a pawn shop on 6th owner says some antique jewelry went missing. No forced entry, so we're thinking it's an inside job or a really sloppy locksmith. Check it out. See what you can find. The pawn shop smelled of dust and desperation. The owner, a wiry man with a nervous twitch, wrung his hands as he recounted the events. The jewelry was in the back room, in the safe. Only 3 people have the combination. Me, my son, and my ex-wife. And she wouldn't do something like this. Riley examined the safe. No scratches, no signs of tampering. You said there was no forced entry. Were the doors locked? Yes, ma'am. I always lock up tight. Mark leaned against the display case, his eyes scanning the room. So, someone with the combination walked in, opened the safe, took the jewelry, and walked out. Clean and simple. He turned his gaze to Riley, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Sounds like our ex-wife has a motive. They spent the next few hours interviewing the son and the ex-wife. The son was a slacker with a gambling problem. The ex-wife was bitter and resentful, still smarting from a messy divorce. Both denied any involvement. As they drove back to the precinct, Riley replayed the interviews in her head. Something wasn't adding up. The ex-wife said she hasn't been to the pawn shop in months. But the owner said she's the only one who knows the full combination. Mark drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Maybe he's lying. Maybe he's trying to protect someone. He glanced at Riley, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Or maybe he's just trying to get some attention. Riley felt a strange pull, a magnetic force drawing her closer to him. His gaze lingered on her a moment too long, sending a shiver down her spine. She looked away, focusing on the passing scenery. We should check the pawn shop's security footage, she said, her voice a little too breathless. See if we can spot anything unusual. Good idea, Callahan. Mark's voice was low, almost a whisper. You're a sharp one. The air in the car felt thick, charged with unspoken tension. As she looked at Mark, his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She saw the glint of something dangerous, something she knew she should avoid. But the butterflies in her stomach were already taking flight. Whispers in the precinct. The pawn shop assaulted Riley's senses with the combined odors of cheap tobacco and desperation. She wrinkled her nose, snapping open her notebook. Serial number's a match. Mrs. Abernathy's necklace, all right. Mark lounged against the glass display case, his gaze like a hawk's. The kid who hawked it, scrawny, jumpy, claimed he unearthed it in an alleyway. The pawnbroker, his fleshy face blurring into his shirt collar, bobbed his head, perspiration dotting his brow. That's the one. Gave him next to nothing. He was lucky to get even that, considering the current climate. Riley sighed, clicking her notebook shut. Another break-in, solved. Another piece of the puzzle neatly fitted, largely thanks to their seamless collaboration. She thrived on the minutiae, the records, the reports, the linking of disparate elements. Mark, seasoned by years on the force and guided by unerring intuition, had an uncanny nose for deceit. They were a formidable pairing, plain and simple. Let's return this to Mrs. Abernathy, Mark suggested, drawing her back to the here and now. She'll be overjoyed. The elderly woman's tearful gratitude upon receiving her cherished possession filled them both. Leaving her warmly lit, flower-filled apartment, Riley felt a familiar stirring within her. It wasn't purely the satisfaction of resolving a case. It was a more complicated, hazardous emotion she fought to suppress. Coffee? Mark inquired, as they approached the cruiser. My treat. A moment of hesitation. Common sense dictated she decline, create distance. But the magnetic pull proved irresistible. Okay, she breathed, almost inaudibly. They gravitated toward a small cafe a few blocks from the precinct, the rich scent of freshly ground beans a welcome escape from the antiseptic air of the station. While in queue, a woman with kind eyes and a tentative smile approached. Mark? She queried, her voice gentle. Mark Thompson. Mark spun around, his face radiant. Sarah, what brings you here? He embraced her warmly. Riley, this is my wife, Sarah. Sarah, meet my partner, Riley Callahan. Riley's stomach plummeted. Sarah Thompson. She extended a hand, summoning a smile. It's a pleasure. The pleasure's all mine, Riley. Mark mentions you constantly. Sarah's demeanor was open and welcoming, utterly disarming. They shared a table, the conversation flowing smoothly, at least superficially. Riley discovered a genuine liking for Sarah. She was vibrant, perceptive, and quick-witted. However, beneath the surface, Riley detected a fragility, a subtle melancholy in her gaze. A few days later, Riley occupied the same cafe, nursing a tepid latte and absorbed in case files. She glanced up to find Sarah approaching her table. Riley, would you mind some company? She asked, her tone strained. Of course, Riley replied, a knot tightening in her stomach. Sarah settled into the chair, stirring her coffee without enthusiasm. After a protracted silence, she spoke, her voice barely audible. Mark's been working incessantly lately. He's hardly ever home, and when he is, he's detached. It's like he's a million miles away. Riley's heart ached for her. She knew intimately the destructive impact of the job, its capacity to consume an individual. I'm sure he cares deeply for you, Sarah, Riley responded, her voice carefully measured. This line of work, it's consuming. It can be difficult to disconnect from it when you're off duty. Sarah sighed heavily. I understand, I truly do. But it transcends the long hours, Riley. It's as if he's no longer completely present. We used to talk endlessly about everything. Now, there's only silence. She met Riley's gaze, her eyes imploring. Do you ever notice it? At work, I mean. Does he seem different to you? Riley's breath hitched. How could she possibly answer that? How could she articulate the spark that sizzled between herself and Mark, the silent understanding that existed between them? How could she confess that yes, She perceived the change too, that Mark was indeed different, yet not in the manner Sarah suspected. He's dedicated, Riley finally offered, carefully selecting her words. He's an excellent officer, Sarah. He approaches his responsibilities with unwavering commitment. Sarah nodded slowly, her expression unconvinced. I miss him, Riley. I miss what we had. A solitary tear escaped and trickled down her cheek. Riley reached across the table, covering Sarah's hand with her own. I'm confident you can resolve this, she stated, her voice infused with a sincerity that felt simultaneously authentic and profoundly false. Just communicate with him. Really communicate. As Sarah expressed her gratitude, a wave of guilt overwhelmed Riley. She was providing solace and guidance, while simultaneously harboring feelings that threatened to shatter Sarah's life. She was a counterfeit, a deceiver, a betrayer to a woman who had done. Blurred lines. The day's anxieties dissolved with the first swallow of the crisp IPA. Riley settled back into the booth's supple leather, the bar's subdued glow a welcome contrast to the precinct's stark lighting. Across from her, Mark swirled amber whiskey in its glass, his gaze unusually intense. Tough one, he murmured, his voice a deep resonance against her skin. That's putting it mildly, Riley responded, watching the play of light in her drink. The break and enter had become a labyrinth, leads evaporating like morning mist. Yet, the case wasn't the source of the knot in her stomach. It was him. We'll solve it, Mark assured, his hand briefly clasping hers. The fleeting contact sparked a forbidden thrill, a surge of energy. She recoiled, feigning a chill and adjusting her jacket. The ensuing quiet crackled with unspoken desires, a palpable electricity connecting them. Riley knew this was a dangerous game. Sarah was her friend, a good soul who deserved far better than this. This entanglement. I should head out, Riley mumbled, reaching for her bag. Mark's fingers closed around her wrist, a firm yet tender restraint. Wait, meet me tonight. Elm Street Garage, 3rd level, midnight. The words hung suspended, laden with implication. Her pulse quickened, a frantic drum against her ribs. I can't, she breathed, her mind already constructing elaborate excuses. His eyes, dark with appeal, bored into hers. Please, I need to talk. She offered no reply, slipping her wrist free and escaping into the cool night. Her choice weighed on her, a leaden cloak with every step. Sleep offered no sanctuary. Riley thrashed, imprisoned in a maelstrom of guilt and longing. She envisioned Sarah, her features contorted with confusion and pain. Why, Riley? She questioned the dream, her voice barely audible. Why this betrayal? Riley awoke with a jolt, her skin slick with sweat, the image of Sarah's wounded expression searing her vision. She checked the bedside clock, 11:47. The parking structure, Elm Street. She knew she shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed against it. But the pull, the irresistible magnetism of Mark, proved too potent to ignore. The garage was a stark, concrete void, echoing with the distant hum of traffic and the rhythmic plink of condensation. Riley discovered Mark leaning against his nondescript vehicle, the flare of a cigarette briefly illuminating his face. He seemed weary, haunted by shadows. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice a low murmur swallowed by the city's drone. I shouldn't be here, Riley stated, voicing the obvious. He extinguished the cigarette under his heel. I know, but I needed to see you. I needed to tell you. He paused, searching for the precise articulation. This has to stop. It's unfair to Sarah, unfair to you, and, God, it's killing me. Riley's spirit plummeted. Was this the end? Was he finally severing the connection? A tide of disappointment threatened to overwhelm her, swiftly chased by a wave of relief. This was the only responsible path. But then he resumed. I can't get you out of my head, Riley. Believe me, I've tried, but he edged closer, his hand lifting to gently brush a stray lock of hair from her temple. I'm coming apart at the seams. And I suspect you are too. His touch ignited her skin, sending a tremor through her core. Sanity urged her to flee, to outrun the captivating allure of his presence. But her body defied her, gravitating toward him, yearning for a nearness she knew she couldn't indulge. "Don't," she whispered, her voice fragile, a mere breath. But the plea was a deception. She wanted him to continue. He didn't cease his advance. Gangland shadows. The air reeked of burnt powder and blood, a coppery tang that clung to the back of the throat. Police tape, a flimsy barrier against the grim reality, danced in the faint breeze like a macabre streamer. Riley stooped beneath it, the narrow beam of her flashlight slicing through the murky pre-dawn. Mark was already at the victim's side, a kid splayed against dented metal bins overflowing with trash, his eyes fixed on something beyond the grimy alley walls. "Another casualty," Mark murmured, the words barely audible. "The serpents are marking their territory again." Riley's face tightened. The serpents, a festering wound on the city, their influence a creeping contagion. This made 3 shootings this month, each more audacious than the last. "Any witnesses?" she queried, carefully avoiding a puddle of spilled beer and shards of glass. Mark's headshake was emphatic. "Same song and dance. Empty alley. Nobody saw, nobody heard." He straightened, frustration creasing his brow. "This has to stop, Riley. We need to come down on these guys with everything we've got." The weight of the investigation settled on Riley's shoulders, an oppressive cloak. It wasn't only the brutality, the senseless waste. It was the sickening sense of always playing catch-up, chasing ghosts in a game designed for them to lose. Later, in the sterile quiet of the community center, Sarah sat across from Maria, a young mother whose brother was rumored to run with the serpents. A low hum of anxiety permeated the room, mirroring the worry etched on the faces of the families caught in the crosscurrents. Sarah offered Maria a mug of tea, the warmth doing little to soothe her trembling. "He doesn't listen anymore," Maria confided, her voice a fragile thread. "Says he's doing it for us, for family. But I only see danger." Sarah listened, her spirit aching. She knew the figures, the bleak truth of gang affiliation. But confronting its human face transformed statistics into something far more devastating. Reaching across the table, she offered a comforting squeeze. "We're here to help, Maria. We'll do all we can." Yet, even as she spoke the reassurances, a seed of doubt took root. How much impact could they truly have? How could they ever disrupt a cycle of violence so deeply ingrained? Back at the precinct, Mark vibrated with suppressed energy, his usual laid-back attitude replaced by a driven, almost frantic intensity. He devoured case files, snapped directives at colleagues, his phone practically grafted to his ear. "What's eating you, Mark?" Riley inquired, leaning against his desk. "You're acting like you've got a personal vendetta against the entire gang." He looked up, exhaustion darkening his features. "Just doing my job, Riley. They're not going to quit unless we make them." But Riley sensed something deeper, something masked beneath this surface agitation. He was holding back, a feeling she couldn't ignore. "Something you're not telling me?" she pressed gently. Mark hesitated, his jaw muscles clenching. "It's nothing, Riley. Just a lot on my plate." He pivoted back to his computer, effectively ending the conversation. Riley watched his retreating back, a chill creeping through her. The serpents posed a formidable threat, but the secrets thickening between her and Mark felt far more insidious, a silent time bomb ticking away. That evening, when Mark finally made it home, Sarah noticed the stark shadows beneath his eyes, the weary droop of his posture. He barely registered at dinner, pushing food around his plate with a vacant gaze. "Everything all right, Mark?" she inquired, her voice laced with concern. A fleeting expression of guilt crossed his face. "Yeah, honey, just a rough case." Sarah longed to believe him, to trust that he would unburden himself. But the gulf between them felt vast and unbridgeable. Later, as she lay in bed, listening to Mark's troubled sleep, she couldn't shake the sensation that something was profoundly wrong, that the shadows of gangland had seeped into their lives, poisoning their sanctuary. The message, the silence in the house was thick enough to choke on. Mark was at the station, chasing down another lead in the BNE case that had consumed his life for weeks. Sarah wandered through the living room, straightening picture frames and fluffing pillows, a nervous habit she'd picked up from her grandmother. The scent of lavender from the diffuser did little to soothe the knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. She spotted Mark's phone on the coffee table, abandoned as usual. He was forever misplacing it, a source of constant irritation for Sarah. Sighing, she picked it up, intending to put on the charger in his office. The screen flickered to life, displaying a text message. It was from Riley. Just her name, floating above the message preview. Sarah's thumb hovered over the screen. She knew she shouldn't, knew it was a violation of trust. But the gnawing feeling in her gut, the way Mark had been distant lately, the hushed phone calls he took outside, it all coalesced into an irresistible urge. She pressed her thumb against the sensor. The message read, "Meet me at the usual place? Need to talk." Sarah's breath hitched. The usual place? What could Riley possibly need to talk about that required such secrecy? A wave of nausea washed over her. This wasn't just about the case. This was personal. She scrolled through the thread, her heart hammering against her ribs. There were other messages, cryptic and charged with an undercurrent of something Sarah couldn't quite name, but felt with a chilling certainty. A stolen glance at a coffee shop, a shared joke about a stakeout, a late-night text about feeling lost. Each message was a tiny stab, twisting deeper with every scroll. The front door clicked open, and Sarah jumped, shoving the phone behind her back. Mark strode in, his face etched with exhaustion. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys on the table. "Long day." "Yeah," Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper. He frowned. "You okay? You look pale." "Fine," she said a little too quickly. "Just tired." She couldn't hold it in. "Who's the usual place, Mark?" His brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Riley," Sarah said, her voice rising. "Her text. Meet me at the usual place? Need to talk." "What's that about?" Mark's face paled. He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. It's about the case, Sarah. We have a confidential informant." "A confidential informant you meet in secret with Riley?" Sarah scoffed. "Don't insult my intelligence." "Look, I can't tell you the details," he said, his voice tight. "It's sensitive. You have to trust me." "Trust you?" Sarah's voice cracked. "How can I trust you when you're lying straight to my face?" He stepped toward her, reaching for her hand. "Sarah, please. Don't do this. You're jumping to conclusions." She recoiled from his touch, as if burned. Am I jumping to conclusions about the late nights, the hushed phone calls, the way you've been avoiding me for weeks? It all makes sense now, doesn't it?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence that followed was deafening, a confirmation of Sarah's worst fears. Turning away, Sarah walked into the bedroom and quietly closed the door. She leaned against the cool wood, tears streaming down her face. The pain was a physical ache, a gaping hole in her chest where trust and love used to reside. She wouldn't confront him further now. He'd just deny it, obfuscate, lie. No, she needed to know the truth, the whole truth, and she knew exactly where to find it. She reached for her own phone, her fingers trembling as she typed a message. It was time to pay Riley Callahan a visit. Cabin confrontation. The cabin smelled strongly of resin and mildew the instant Mark shoved the stubborn door inward. Smaller than advertised, the single space featured clashing decor and a fieldstone hearth that looked more like a hazard than a heat source. Sarah shivered, a premonition of trouble burrowing deep, unrelated to the crisp air of autumn. Ever practical, Riley launched immediately into damage control, picking at the pilled fabric of the dilapidated pullout. "Quaint," Riley offered, her tone strained. "Definitely quaint." Mark grunted, already investigating the cramped kitchenette. "Dibs on the first shower." "You all right, Sarah?" She mustered a smile. "Just travel weary." It was a long haul. She watched him vanish into the minuscule bathroom, the plumbing's wheezing protest echoing. This was it, the moment of truth. "Riley," she began, her voice a thread. Riley pivoted, concern knitting her brow. "You've lost your color. Maybe you should rest." Sarah shook her head, the the words aching in her chest. "It's about you and Mark." Riley's forced cheer dissolved. Her face paled further, appearing almost spectral in the weak light filtering through dusty panes. She remained silent, eyes wide with apprehension. "I know," Sarah said, the confession rushing forth, a long-held-back surge. "I saw you both. At the office. That night." Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Riley finally spoke, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "Sarah, it's not what you think. Not what I think. What else could it be, Riley? My husband is entangled with my friend." The accusation landed like a slap. "It's complicated," Riley insisted, her voice gaining volume. "Things just evolved. Mark and we share a connection." "A connection?" Sarah echoed, a mirthless sound escaping her. "You connected while I was cooking his meals, dreaming of our future, confiding in you my deepest hopes." A burning pressure swelled behind her eyes, threatening tears. The bathroom door groaned open, and Mark emerged, a towel draped around his neck. He froze, his gaze snapping between the two women. The atmosphere thrummed with concealed conflict. "What's going on here?" he asked, a note of caution in his voice. "Tell him, Riley," Sarah challenged, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Tell him about your little secret." Riley's gaze darted to Mark, a silent plea for intervention. "Mark, please, just say something." Mark sighed, raking a hand through his damp hair. "Sarah, look, I never meant for this to happen." "Not meant to happen." Sarah's voice rose, cracking. "You betrayed me. Both of you." Tears streamed freely now, blurring the scene. A volcanic fury, previously unknown, erupted within her. "It's not like that, Sarah." Mark placated, edging closer. "We can salvage this. We can work it out." "Salvage it?" Sarah recoiled, shrinking away from his touch. "There's nothing left to salvage, Mark. You destroyed it. You destroyed us." Riley remained rooted to the spot, a tableau of culpability and dread. She opened her mouth, but the words failed her. "I thought we were allies." "Riley," Sarah uttered, her voice thick with emotion. "I trusted you implicitly. How could you inflict this kind of pain?" Riley finally managed to speak, her voice a mere whisper. "I never intended for any of this to occur, Sarah. I swear." "Swear." Sarah spat the word out. "Your oaths are worthless to me now." She snatched her purse from the floor, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "I'm leaving. I can't bear to breathe the same air as either of you." She spun and stumbled toward the exit, grappling with the stubborn latch. The weight of their perfidy crushed her. As she plunged into the biting night, she heard Mark shout, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. The cabin, intended as a sanctuary, had morphed into a cage. An escape was her only option. The fall. "He has a right to know." Sarah's voice frayed, a high, sharp sound like splintering wood. She edged toward Riley, her hand extended in supplication. "Please, Riley, just tell him the truth." Riley flinched as though stung. The confined space thrummed with unvoiced recriminations, the aroma of coffee now sharp and bitter. "I can't, Sarah. You understand I can't. Why perpetuate the lie? Are you afraid of his judgment?" Sarah's tone escalated, a keen edge ready to wound. By the window, Mark stood rigid, a tapestry of anguish woven across his features. Rain hammered the pane, mirroring the turmoil within. Murky light elongated the shadows, transforming the familiar into grotesque parodies. "Please don't push this, Sarah." Riley's voice trembled, a fragile whisper echoing Sarah's own despair. "Push what, Riley? The charade? Your betrayal with my husband." The accusation hung between them, viscous and suffocating. A raw, profound pain blazed in Sarah's eyes, almost causing Riley to recoil. She moved closer, again reaching for Riley. "Please, just tell him. He deserves honesty." Riley stumbled back, her heel snagging on the rug's edge. A choked sound escaped her as equilibrium deserted her, her arms windmilling for purchase. But there was none. Sarah, caught off guard, lunged forward to steady her, but it was too late. Riley's weight dragged Sarah with her. A garbled cry burst from Sarah as they plummeted, a chaotic jumble of limbs and gasping breaths. The back of Sarah's skull struck the fireplace's unforgiving stone corner with a sickening crack. Riley landed heavily, the impact stealing her breath. Disoriented, she pushed herself upright, the room tilting. Sarah lay motionless, eyes shut, a fragile thread of blood unfurling through her dark hair and staining the antique rug. A frigid wave of panic washed over Riley. She crawled closer, her fingers trembling as she sought Sarah's pulse at her wrist. Weak, fluttering but present. "Mark, call 911. Now!" Riley's voice was a shredded plea. Mark remained transfixed, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a look bordering on terror. He didn't react. "Mark!" Riley cried out again, gently shaking Sarah. "Damn it, Mark, do something." He finally stirred, as if jolted awake. "No," he murmured, barely audible. "No ambulance." "What? Have you lost your mind?" "She needs immediate assistance." Riley's heart hammered, a frantic tattoo of fear against her ribs. "An ambulance, questions, investigation." Mark's words were fragmented, his gaze flitting around the room, seeking a non-existent escape route. "Don't you see, Riley? This can't become public." Riley stared at him, incredulity warring with a burgeoning horror. "What are you suggesting?" "It was an accident. A simple fall. We can manage this ourselves." He advanced toward them, his voice strengthening, a chilling determination crystallizing in his expression. "We have to. Manage? She requires a hospital, Mark. Her life is at stake." Riley's voice was a raw shriek, on the verge of hysteria. He knelt beside Sarah, his hand hovering hesitantly above her face. "She'll recover. We'll care for her." He looked up at Riley, a desperate appeal etched in his eyes. "Please, Riley. For me. For us." Riley's gaze shifted from Sarah's still form to Mark's imploring face, the gravity of his proposition pressing down on her, suffocating her. The rain intensified, lashing against the windows like an unrelenting judge. A choice, brutal and inescapable, confronted her. And in that heartbeat, she knew she was already plunging into the abyss. Web of lies. The sickening crunch of metal on bone echoed in Riley's ears, a relentless loop of horror. She stared at the crumpled figure beneath the truck, the air thick with a metallic tang of blood. Mark stood beside her, face bleached white, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We have to call it in," Riley choked out, her hand reaching for her phone. Mark's hand clamped down on her wrist, stopping her. "No. Think, Riley. Think what this looks like. You were here. You argued with him. You know how this looks." His grip tightened, bruising her skin. Panic clawed at Riley's throat. He was right. It looked terrible. But lying felt worse. "We can't just leave him here. We have to do something." Mark glanced around the deserted warehouse district, his eyes darting nervously. I know. We'll make it look like an accident. A hit and run. Someone speeding through here." He released her wrist and began frantically wiping down the truck's bumper with his jacket. Riley watched him, her stomach churning. This was wrong. So wrong. But the thought of the investigation, the questions, the suspicion, it was a terrifying vortex she didn't want to be sucked into. What about the security cameras?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mark stopped, his eyes widening. "Damn it, I didn't think about that." He looked up at the nearest camera, its unblinking eyes staring down at them. "Okay, new plan. We were never here. Got it. We leave. Now." He grabbed her hand again, pulling her toward his car. Riley resisted, her feet dragging on the asphalt. "Mark, this is insane. We can't just... We have to," he hissed, his voice laced with desperation. "For us. For our future." He shoved her into the passenger seat and sped away, tires squealing, leaving behind a scene of devastation and a growing web of lies. Back at her apartment, Riley paced restlessly. The image of the man lying broken on the ground haunted her. She couldn't live with this. She had to do something. She grabbed her burner phone, the one she used for undercover work, and dialed the police department. She disguised her voice, deepening it slightly. "I have information about a possible hit and run. in the warehouse district near Dock Street. A blue pickup truck was involved. She hung up before the operator could ask any questions, her heart pounding in her chest. A few minutes later, her personal cell phone buzzed. It was Mark. "Where are you?" he texted. Riley typed back, "At home." "Why?" "Meet me at the diner." "Now." He knew. Somehow he knew. At the diner, Mark slid into the booth across from her, his face grim. "Don't ever do that again." Riley's blood ran cold. "Do what?" "Don't play games, Riley. I have ears everywhere. You think you can just call an anonymous tip? I know it was you." She stared at him, speechless. The extent of his control, his manipulation, was terrifying. I couldn't just do nothing," she stammered. "You did nothing. We did nothing. That's the story, and you're sticking to it." His eyes were hard, devoid of any warmth. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, Detective Miller surveyed the scene, his gaze sharp and analytical. The skid marks seemed inconsistent with a hit and run. They were too short, too hesitant. He knelt down, examining the ground more closely. He found a small piece of chrome, broken off a vehicle. He bagged it as evidence, a nagging feeling tugging at the back of his mind. He pulled out his notepad and reread Mark's initial statement. Victim was likely struck by a speeding vehicle. No witnesses. Something about Mark's demeanor that morning had struck him as odd. He'd seemed distracted. Miller made a note to pull the security camera footage. Something wasn't adding up. Truth and consequences. Miller slid the last photo across the DA's polished desk. It was a close-up of the fibers found on Sarah's dress, magnified 100 times. Identical to the rug in Mark Thompson's living room. Distinct dye lot. Exclusive manufacturer. We also found traces of the same rug fibers in his car. D.A. Harding leaned back, his face a mask of grim consideration. Circumstantial, but damning. What about the timeline? We reconstructed it. Mark claimed he was at home all night, working on reports. His computer confirms he was logged in, but the activity is minimal, just enough to make it look like he was working. Phone records show he made a call to Sarah's number around 10 p.m., lasting just over a minute. Then, pinged off a tower near her house. Back home around midnight. And Riley Callahan? Harding asked, his gaze sharp. Cleared. Alibi checks out. She was at a bar with friends. Plenty of witnesses. She's clean. Harding steepled his fingers. All right, Miller. Bring Thompson in. Let's see what he has to say for himself. The air in the precinct crackled with tension. Riley watched Mark from across the bullpen. He was hunched over his desk, typing, seemingly oblivious. She tried to catch his eye, but he avoided her gaze. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Something was terribly wrong. Miller approached Mark's desk, his face devoid of emotion. Thompson, DA wants to see you. Now. Mark looked up, startled. His eyes darted around the room, landing briefly on Riley before flicking away. He stood, his movements stiff and unnatural. In the interrogation room, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. Miller laid out the evidence, the fibers, the phone records, the timeline discrepancies. Mark denied everything, his voice rising in pitch with each denial. He claimed the fibers could have transferred somehow, that the phone call was a mistake, a butt dial. We know about the affair, Mark, Miller said, his voice flat. With Riley. And with Sarah. A messy triangle, wouldn't you say? Mark's face paled. He stammered, trying to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. Sarah was going to tell your wife, wasn't she? Miller pressed. That's why you killed her. Mark lunged across the table, his eyes wild with fury. Two officers restrained him, forcing him back into his chair. I didn't kill her, he screamed. I love her. The words hung in the air, a confession wrapped in a lie. Mark Thompson, you're under arrest for the murder of Sarah Jenkins. Riley watched from behind the one-way mirror, her heart shattering into a million pieces. The man she thought she knew, the man she had cared for, was a murderer. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing her breath, leaving her weak. Later, alone in her apartment, Riley stared out at the city lights, each one a tiny spark of life going on, oblivious to the darkness that had engulfed hers. The rain outside mirrored the storm inside her. She kept replaying the past few months, searching for signs, for clues she had missed. Had she been so blinded by her own desires that she hadn't seen the monster hiding beneath Mark's charming facade? She thought of Sarah, a woman she had never met, now gone, a victim of Mark's lies and deceit. And she thought of Mark's wife, soon to learn the devastating truth about her husband. The pain rippled outwards, touching so many lives, all because of one man's actions. Riley wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, not from the cold, but from the chilling realization of how easily she could have been next.